The god of wine, theater, and religious ecstasy, Dionysus, was the son of Zeus and a mortal named Semele. He was the first Olympian deity to be begotten of a mortal woman, and before attaining his divinity, he roamed distant lands, spreading his sacred rites and mysteries, establishing his cult and divine power in different regions. Dionysus journeyed across Lydia and the Phrygian plains. He explored the Persian highlands, the cities of Bactria and Media. He reached the outer fringes of Arabia and traveled through Asia. During this journey, Dionysus introduced his rituals, revealing his divine nature to mortals. He attracted followers and consolidated his cult in foreign lands, preparing the ground for his triumphant homecoming to Greece. Thebes, the city where his mother was born and died tragically, was the final stop on his quest. His homeland, the place where his mother lived and died. Upon returning to Thebes, Dionysus was faced with a spectacle that enraged him deeply. Prompted by envy and resentment, his mother's sisters had spread vicious rumors about his origin. They denied his divinity, doubting his ancestry, insinuating that Semele, seduced by a mortal lover, had fabricated the story of her relationship with Zeus to mask her own wrongdoing. The insult to his mother's memory and the negation of his own divine nature stirred in Dionysus a burning urge for revenge. He could not let lies and injustice prevail in Thebes, the city that had once seen him born. Using his divine powers, he laid a spell on the women of Thebes, sparking a religious frenzy that devoured them utterly. Caught up in an all-consuming zeal, the women abandoned their homes, husbands, and children to follow the god into the mountains. Up the slopes of Mount Kithaeron, the women, now known as Bacchantes or Maenads, indulged in rapturous rituals in Dionysus's honor. They danced feverishly, sang in praise of the god of wine and revelry, and surrendered to the pleasures of the flesh. The wild and indomitable nature manifests itself in their bodies and souls while they celebrate the freedom provided by the god. In the meantime, King Pentheus, Dionysus's cousin, despaired in Thebes as he watched the social order collapse under the rule of the foreign god. He refused to accept Dionysus's divinity and condemned the Bacchantes' rituals as a threat to civilization. In his arrogance and blindness, Pentheus failed to notice that he was challenging a power much greater than himself, and that his stubbornness would bring him to a tragic and cruel fate. As Dionysian fervor overtook Thebes, two revered and esteemed figures, the soothsayer Tiresias and the ancient king Cadmus, recognized his divinity and the importance of honoring him. Tiresias's wisdom, earned through years of interpreting oracles and divine signs, and Cadmus's experience, the founder and former ruler of Thebes, prompt them to accept the new god and partake in his rituals. Having changed their traditional garments for animal skins and their heads adorned with ivy crowns, symbolic of the god of wine and ecstasy, they prepared to join the Bacchantes in the mountains, displaying their devotion and respect for the divinity manifesting in Thebes. But Pentheus refused to accept the new order. On seeing his grandfather Cadmus and the eminent Tiresias clad in animal hides and ready to take part in the Dionysian rituals, he went into a rage. For Pentheus, the involvement of these esteemed individuals in such rituals was an affront to the city's values and traditions, an insane act that threatened the established order and the honor of the royal family. With his ancestral wisdom, Tiresias attempted to warn Pentheus about the perils of defying a god. He argued that the god of wine and ecstasy, Dionysus, offered mortals deliverance from the daily pains and worries, bringing them moments of joy and communion with the divine. Negating Dionysus's divinity was an act of impiety that would have dire consequences for Pentheus and the entire city. But Pentheus, struck by arrogance and a lust for power, refused to listen to the soothsayer's sound advice. As king, he believed he was entitled to impose his will on the city and its inhabitants, even if it meant contradicting the will of that so-called god. Pentheus was adamant about putting an end to the Dionysian rituals and punishing anyone who followed them. Pentheus ordered his guards to immediately arrest Dionysus. The foreigner's presence, with his alluring speech and sway over the women of Thebes, was unbearable for the king, who felt that his authority and social order were at risk. In compliance with Pentheus's orders, the guards went in search of Dionysus and found him lecturing on his rites and mysteries to a group of women. Although they were initially opposed by the Bacchantes, who were trying to protect their leader, the guards did capture Dionysus and chained him up to the palace. Dionysus showed no fear or regret before the king. His calm demeanor and enigmatic smile baffled Pentheus, who expected to find a scared and submissive prisoner. Bewildered by the foreigner's attitude, the king, blinded by arrogance and believing that he was dealing with an impostor, ordered Dionysus to be thrown into the palace stables, a dark and damp place, out of sight of the public and unable to interact with his followers. But Pentheus underestimated the might of this god he despised so much. With a divine gesture, Dionysus conjured up an earthquake that shook the foundations of the palace, wreaking havoc and terror. The walls shook, the columns cracked, and the ceiling collapsed as the guards and courtiers rushed about in panic. Amid all the commotion, Dionysus escaped from prison, vanishing without a trace. Pentheus and his guards, astonished and helpless when faced with the supernatural power they had just witnessed, understood that Dionysus's arrest had been a deadly mistake. The gods fleeing was a clear sign that the battle between the king and the divinity has only just begun, and the established order in Thebes was about to be defied in an unprecedented way. The tension rose when a distressed shepherd reached the city and told Pentheus about the bizarre events he had witnessed on Mount Cithaeron. He described the ecstatic women, their mysterious rituals and supernatural powers, such as the ability to make water and wine pour out of the earth, and to control wild animals. The shepherd also told of the Bacchantes' superhuman strength, able to battle and defeat armed men with their bare hands and tusks. The shepherd's news angered Pentheus even more, reinforcing his resolve to put an end to the cult of Dionysus. He decided to head in person to Mount Cithaeron to spy on the women and collect evidence of their immoral acts. But Dionysus, the crafty and deceitful god, had other plans for Pentheus. He appeared once again before the king, this time with an intriguing proposal. Pentheus would have to disguise himself as a woman to infiltrate the Bacchantes unnoticed. At first reluctant to don women's clothing, Pentheus eventually yielded to Dionysus's persuasion, enticed by the opportunity to witness the women's secret rituals firsthand and confirm his suspicions about the cult's depraved nature. Clad in a long female robe and wearing a wig and veil to hide his identity, Pentheus turned into a hideous caricature of a woman. Pentheus, trapped by hubris and morbid curiosity, had walked right into Dionysus's trap. Lured by the promise of witnessing the Bacchantes' secret rituals, he allowed himself to be swept away by an illusion of control, believing that he could sneak up on them unnoticed. But he was unaware of his doom. In their ecstatic state, the Bacchantes, led by Dionysus, detect Pentheus's presence. The king's masquerade did not fool the eyes of the religiously fervent women, who mistook him for a wild animal. They surrounded him, poised to attack, their eyes blazing with fury and their thyrsi held high. Agave, Pentheus's mother and the Bacchantes' leader, in a religious trance, was the first to attack. She grabbed her son, who futilely attempted to reveal his identity, and restrained him on the ground. With superhuman strength, she tore Pentheus's head from his shoulders, hoisting it like a hunting trophy, as the other Bacchantes joined in the rampage, dismembering the king's body. Pentheus's slaying was a gruesome and violent scene, symbolizing the destruction brought upon by hubris and the disregard for the gods. Agave entered Thebes, triumphantly bearing what she believed to be the head of a lion, impaled on her thyrsus. In her Dionysian delirium, she bragged of her hunt and invited everyone to join her in celebrating her heroic deed. Still in the throes of a trance, Agave approached her father and showed him the trophy of her hunt, proud of her strength and courage. Heartbroken, Cadmus attempted to bring her back to reality, making her question the true nature of her prey. Agave slowly regained her sanity, and the curtain of madness that had covered her eyes was lifted. Gradually, she realized the grim truth. The head was not that of a lion, but of her own son, Pentheus. Unveiling the truth dealt a devastating blow to Agave. Joy and pride turned to despair and horror. The mother, who only moments before was celebrating her victory, was now contorted in agony, torn apart by grief and guilt. Dionysus, the god previously scorned and defied by Pentheus and his followers, decided to reveal his true divine form. He rose above mortals, beaming with power and majesty, and his voice rang out like thunder. Before Cadmus and the desolate Agave, who was still gripping her son's severed head, Dionysus proclaimed that Pentheus's brutal murder was a fair punishment for his ruthlessness, arrogance, and refusal to acknowledge the god's power. But Dionysus's divine rage was not quenched by Pentheus's death. He proclaimed an even crueler fate for Cadmus and Agave, to punish them for taking part in the tragic events. The once powerful king of Thebes and his daughter, formerly proud of her lineage, would be exiled from their homeland and turned into serpents. Doomed to prowl the earth like wild creatures, they would forever bear the weight of their guilt and the shame of their deeds. Dionysus's revelation was an earth-shattering shock for Agave. She collapsed in despair, regretting her actions and the curse that had fallen on her family. Agave, who only moments before had flaunted her strength and courage, now saw herself as a monster, damned and sentenced to a wretched existence. Cadmus, a witness to the downfall of his lineage and family, joined his daughter in her grief. He mourned the loss of Pentheus, the grandson he had loved, and who was to be his heir to the throne of Thebes. The tragedy that struck his family was too heavy a burden for the old king, who saw his dreams of glory and prosperity crumble to dust. Confronted with the tragedy that had befallen Thebes, Dionysus explained his ruthless actions as a punishment for Pentheus and his followers' disrespect and hubris. He recalled how he had been despised and ridiculed, how his divine laws had been ignored and his cult forbidden. Pentheus's death and Cadmus and Agave's exile were inevitable consequences of the mortals' lawlessness and lack of faith. Filled with regret and pain, Agave begged Dionysus for forgiveness. She acknowledged her mistakes and the injustice she had perpetrated against the god. Yet Dionysus reminded her that it was too late to repent. Pentheus's death and the curse that befell his family were permanent, and Agave would have to bear the consequences of her actions. Distraught and humiliated, Agave bid farewell to her father Cadmus and went into exile with her sisters and the other Bacchantes. She left her home, family, and life behind, burdened by guilt and the pain of loss. Pentheus and Agave's story was a warning to all those who boldly defied divine power and the universe's natural order. The tragedy of the Bacchantes forces us to remember that arrogance and disbelief may lead to ruin, and the revenge of the gods can be merciless and devastating.